Welcome to Pick Up and Deliver, the podcast where I pick up my audio recorder as I step off the train and deliver an episode to you while I walk home. I'm Brendan Riley. Good afternoon, listeners. It is a chilly day here in suburban Chicago. The snow is coming down and it's just starting to snow again. I don't know if it's cold enough that it's actually going to accumulate, but there's a fair amount coming down. It's a little, not blustery, but it is definitely chilly and colder than I wanted it to be on my walk home in the middle of March. March is always cold and warm at the same time. Like it'll be warm one day, cold the next. That's life in the Midwest in March. Well, I recently finished a book called The Fifth Risk. This is by one of my favorite, if not my favorite nonfiction writer, one of my favorite nonfiction writers, perhaps bested only by Mary Roach. And this is Michael Lewis, best known for his book about the rise of statistics in baseball, Moneyball, and for exposing lots of interesting realities about the housing market crash, The Big Short, and in the 1980s about the savings and loans scandal, his book Liar's Poker. He's written several other books. They're all really good. He wrote one about the pandemic last year that was fantastic. The one I just finished reading is called The Fifth Risk, and this is about the transition from the Obama administration to the Trump administration in 2016 or 2017. And what Lewis is writing about is not the politics of individual parties, but rather that the effect that Trump's administration had was one of not caring, that every other administration, Republican or Democrat, has spent a ton of energy setting up people to take on the the governing responsibilities of various key institutions in the U.S. government. And the Trump organization did not do any of that. So instead of having people ready to come in when the transition happened and learn how the system works and learn what's going on and take the reins, often the people who would be in charge of these offices had no interest in learning what the systems did, or they didn't visit, it's a really disheartening book because a big part of what Lewis is trying to do is show that the U.S. government is this sort of massive machine that, for the most part, works for the betterment of the American people. That most of the people who work in government are earnest, hardworking civil servants who've gone into it for the love of what they do and for the love of our country. And they get almost no credit and no recognition for having done so. And one of the things that he wrote about was an office of, I think it was in the Department of Labor, which turns out one of the things the Department of Labor does is they govern bioterrorism or they watch out for bioterrorism, and they also are the main force that watches out for nuclear waste, I guess. I might be wrong. Whatever office it is that does that, it's counter instinctive. It's not who you think would. But what he was writing about is the person who had under President Obama, done all of this work, had then kind of unceremoniously left office when the new person took over, but the new person never bothered to come by and find out what needed doing or what the job was about. And so he writes, or they were talking about, I think Michael Lewis asked him what risk does he think the American people face that's the most significant? And the guy he said, I'll give you 5. And he ran through 4 of them. Then Michael Lewis said, what's the 5th risk? And the guy said, whatever we're not watching for. Which is a fascinating idea, this idea that we need to be looking for things, and the thing that we aren't looking for is often the thing that's the worst. So I was thinking about two game questions that come out of my reading of this Michael Lewis book. One comes from the title, The Fifth Risk. And I'm interested in thinking about what does the fifth risk mean as part of a game design. So if you think about in a game design, particularly, let's say, a co-op where you can lose, but also, a competitive game. I'll use Through the Ages as an example, right? I regularly play Through the Ages. Now, I've got two different people that I play regularly with and lose to both. Sort of a bummer to discover that I'm not really getting much better because within a couple games, the new player was already besting me, whereas I've still barely cracked the surface with the player I've been competing with a long time. Hi, Ray. Hi, Chris. But Through the Ages is a good example of maybe this philosophy of the fifth risk, or thinking about what risks you have to watch for, because there are a lot of different levers to pull in Through the Ages. And I often find that I'm either on even footing or I'm on the back foot. It's very rare that I'm on the front foot, in part because it's not in my nature to play aggressively, to actually play aggression cards and attack the other player. But partly also just because I still haven't quite grokked when I'm supposed to pivot and start shooting my points up in the final round. That often there's this moment, particularly with Ray, the very experienced player, where maybe we'll be neck and neck in the ages 1 and 2. And somewhere about 1 or 2 turns into age 3, suddenly he's getting 25 points a round. And I don't really understand how he did it when we were kind of even before. Now, if I go back and look, I see that he's been stockpiling ore and he'd been really preparing to make that move. And often the problem that assails me is, 1, I don't know how to make that move. And 2, I don't know how to keep up if I'm trying to stockpile all that ore and people. But I'm not complaining about my Through the Ages skill level. Instead, what I want to do is talk about that fifth risk, the risk you're not watching for, which is often the one that gets me. So because it's so complicated, I'm often looking at, okay, am I keeping up on population? Am I keeping up on smiley faces? Am I keeping up on ore production so that I can give those people jobs once I'm able to add them through my food production? Am I keeping up on technology? Am I keeping up on government? Am I keeping up on exploration? Am I keeping up on military? And obviously you can't keep up on all of those, but often it feels like the one that I wasn't watching for is the one that really grips me when the moment comes. And it feels like the fifth risk, the thing you weren't watching for. I feel like this happens in all sorts of games, competitive games particularly, where somebody can maneuver you so the thing you're not quite paying attention to becomes the crux of your problem. A Brass Birmingham, a good example is the availability of beer. Generally, that game does not have a ton of beer available. You have some you can make yourself if you're careful about it. But if the beer is attached to the network, other people can take it. And it's really just if you have it in a place where other people can't get to it, that you're able to keep it until you want to use it. And so one of the things that I think when people experience this sort of surprise is when somebody manages to figure out a way to get the beer that the other person thought they had in reserve. Or even if they aren't, maybe they're just not playing as strategically and they were hoping to use it. The number of times you'll hear somebody go, oh no, I have to completely rethink my last 3 turns because somebody did something or took something that was going to shake out in a way that you just wouldn't be able to recover from. So I'm curious, listener, what are some games that you think have a fifth risk? Have a thing that the game that maybe it's a story of experiences. Like, what's a thing that you've encountered that you did not know was a potential risk, and then like suddenly somebody gets you with it. Yeah, that would be the fifth risk, I guess. A thing you don't even know to be looking for. So I'd love to hear about that. The other thing the book inspired me to ask about or wonder about is transitions. So, like I said, in the book, a lot of the book is about how different offices in the United States government prepared to transition from one administration to the next, and the person to whom they were supposed to kind of hand the ball did not appear to catch it, or did not, in the track and field metaphor, they weren't there to take the baton. They weren't running. And so I'm wondering if that's a thing that we see in board games this idea of a handoff where you have to be kind of up to speed in order to take it. I mean, honestly, Through the Ages again reminds me of that, because in Through the Ages, you need to have enough grain production and enough ore production that when you get into the later levels or the later eras, you have enough to sustain adding and building your civilization. You can get in a rut where if you don't have enough grain or science, that you can't get around the position you put yourself in. This actually happens to me with cards, and I'm not 100% sure that Board Game Arena works this way, but I think it's true that if you take a card, you have to keep it in your hand until you either play it into your board or it ages out because the age after the one it was in comes. So if you have a stage 1 card and stage 3 starts, you can discard the stage 1 card out of your hand. In fact, you have to. But that means I have had times where I'm not paying attention to various pieces of my engine. Maybe I've got a sustaining food engine, but not a growth one. Maybe I am underproducing in the different resources that I need. And I don't have enough science to really advance something. So I've had turns where I wasn't thinking, and so I take some technologies, and then my hand is full of technologies. But I'm only producing 1 or 2 technologies around, and I need 6 in order to play that technology. And on top of it, I don't have enough of the other resources to move anything. So you have to play pretty badly to do this, but like I said, so you end up you can kind of get straitjacketed by failing to prepare for the transition from one age to the next. But I can't think of games where you pass control of a thing from one player to the next. I guess the Crew. I'm playing the Crew right now in a sort of ongoing game on Board Game Arena. And in the Crew, you're of course passing the lead from one player to the next, and they have to be kind of ready to take it. Where else do you pass something from one player to the next, and if they can handle it, they get stuff. If they can't, they don't. I guess the other night I played Boss Monster. And we'll talk about that a little. I don't know if I've ever talked about it on the show, so I might talk about that a little more later. But one of the things that you can do is you can play different cards that will take or move the different warrior cards to different people's dungeons. And there, once again, if the other person is not kind of ready to receive the warrior that they get, it runs through and trashes their dungeon. And I would say it's far worse in Dungeon Lords. In Boss Monster, if an enemy runs through your dungeon and you can't stop them, you just take a wound. And if you take 5 wounds, you lose the game. In Dungeon Lords, each room that the heroes survive, they destroy. And so if you aren't able to kill the heroes, the rooms that you've spent a lot of energy building up and maybe gold and turns adding things to this room, that room is destroyed, and all that work that you did is flushed down the toilet. That's a pretty brutal engine compared to other things. And as I recall, there are slightly ways to manipulate which dungeon the adventurers are going to go to, but not tons. Which brings me back to the challenge of figuring out how you're going to navigate the board game space with the potential of having some sort of transfer handed to you. I can't think of... actually, now I do have one more place where you have to set yourself up for a good transfer, and that is A Feast for Odin or Agricola or any of the resource management games that run in rounds. So in those games, you have a series of things you're collecting, and they're gathering together and you're getting ready to move, and then when you want to move them, or when the round ends, you have some sort of reset. You will spend some of your resources to feed your people. You'll do various kinds of activities to kind of reset. And then when the next round starts, if you've set yourself up for productive activity, you have some resources that you can spend to move the next round forward. As I think of it, I think that is a thing, that is definitely a thing. Preparing for the handoff is definitely part of a game like that. Praga, Kaput Regni, and Underwater Cities both have that element of rhythm as well. The idea that you really have to prepare to hand off one thing to the next in order to make the game flow. So that's what I had to say today. Sorry, it was a little ramshackle. I did not have a clear sense of what kinds of things I wanted to talk about today, so it's a bit up and down, but hopefully you enjoyed it. Let me know over in the Board Game Geek forum, Board Game Geek Guild 3269. What did you think? What games have the fifth risk that you are thinking of? Also, what are some of the ways that you have to prepare for a handoff in the game? I would love to hear it. Head over to Board Game Geek Guild 3269. I already said that. You could also send me a direct message, Wombat929. I'd be happy to hear that. Or email me, Brendan at Rattlebox Games. Thanks for joining me on my walk today. I hope that your next walk is as pleasant as mine was. Bye-bye.
Brought to you by Rattlebox Games.